Hello, this is 48 Hours True Crime. Today, we'll be analyzing the case of Marsha Kelly. First, we'll examine the background of the individuals involved, then move through the timeline of the crime itself before finally discussing the evidence and offering an analysis of what may have happened. Marsha Gail Kelly was born on December 21, 1970, and lived in Cushing, Texas. Interestingly, Marsha preferred her name to be pronounced Marseilles, despite the spelling suggesting otherwise. For simplicity, I'll refer to her as Marsha throughout this video. From a young age, Marsha was known for being rebellious and thrill-seeking. At just 17 years old, she got married. After having 2 daughters, the marriage eventually ended in divorce. At the age of 21, Marsha met a man named James Kelly while attending a local street race. Their relationship became an on-and-off romance that lasted for several years. During that period, Marsha had a 3rd daughter with another man, while James had 2 sons with a different woman. Then, in 1995, tragedy struck. Marsha's middle daughter and her own mother were killed in a house fire caused by an electrical malfunction. The devastating loss deeply affected the family, especially Marsha's oldest daughter, Shaina, who later spent time in a mental health facility. As the years passed, Marsha became a respiratory therapist and worked at a local hospital. She also operated a bounce house rental business, although it reportedly struggled financially. Meanwhile, James Kelly eventually found direction in his own life after serving time in jail. He started a short-haul trucking company and gradually built enough success to own 3 tractor-trailers. Eventually, Marsha and James decided to commit to a serious relationship. They moved into a double-wide trailer located on family-owned property where several relatives lived nearby. In February 2003, the couple got married. However, Marsha's daughter, Shaina, did not adjust well to the new living arrangement. Much like her mother, Shaina had a rebellious personality. At 14 years old, she briefly moved in with her boyfriend before returning home a few weeks later. By age 16, she moved out again, this time with her 23-year-old boyfriend, Dallas Christian. Dallas already had a troubling criminal history involving inappropriate conduct that required him to register as an offender. Despite this alarming background, Marsha appeared to accept the relationship. On October 5, 2005, tensions inside the household exploded. Marsha and Shaina became involved in a physical altercation after Shaina refused to clean her room. The fight was still ongoing when police arrived at the scene. Shaina was arrested and later placed on juvenile probation. Now, let's move to the timeline of the crime. On Saturday, October 22, 2005, Marsha Kelly worked an overnight shift at the hospital. James Kelly was also working that night, performing maintenance on his trucks. Around 3:30 a.m. on Sunday, October 23, James went to sleep. Before doing so, he spoke to Marsha on the phone and asked her to wake him up at 7:30 that morning. Later, Marsha contacted David Bone, James's stepfather, who lived only a few hundred yards away from the trailer. She asked him to wake James instead. David drove over on a lawn tractor and entered the trailer, but he quickly realized something was terribly wrong. James Kelly was dead. At 8:20 a.m., David called 911. When investigators arrived, they discovered James lying in bed with a fatal gunshot wound to the face. He had been shot once with a .30-30 Winchester rifle while asleep. The murder weapon was missing from the scene. Almost immediately, investigators focused their attention on Marsha's 16-year-old daughter, Shaina. Police interviewed Shaina, her boyfriend Dallas Christian, and a 15-year-old friend named Colton Weir. Shaina and Dallas claimed they had spent the night driving around back roads and drinking alcohol during the time of the murder. However, Colton told investigators a completely different story. Colton confessed to killing James Kelly. According to his statement, during the early morning hours of October 23, Colton, Shaina, Dallas, and 2 friends named Gary and Billy drove to James Kelly's trailer. Dallas was driving. Once they arrived, Shaina led Colton inside and showed him where James was sleeping. Colton entered the bedroom and shot James once in the face. Afterward, Colton and Shaina returned to the vehicle, placed the rifle in the trunk, and left the property. Dallas then drove the group to Goodman Bridge, where Colton threw the rifle into the Angelina River. Investigators later recovered the rifle exactly where Colton claimed he had discarded it. Colton further alleged that both Marsha and Shaina orchestrated the murder. He claimed he had been promised $10,000 and a dually pickup truck in exchange for killing James. Eventually, both Shaina and Dallas also confessed to involvement in the crime. When police questioned Marsha, she denied any role in the murder. However, she admitted overhearing conversations among the teenagers about wanting to kill James. Despite her denial, investigators became convinced that Marsha was the mastermind behind the homicide. She, Shaina, Colton, and Dallas were all charged with capital murder. Marsha's trial began on July 31, 2006. Just days later, on August 4, she was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In November 2006, Colton was also convicted of capital murder. Shaina received the same conviction in April 2007. Both initially received life sentences without parole, though appeals later reduced their sentences to life with the possibility of parole. They will become eligible for parole in October 2045. Dallas Christian eventually accepted a plea deal in 2008, pleading guilty to first-degree murder. He received a 40-year prison sentence, avoiding a capital murder conviction. His projected release date is December 2045, though he could potentially be released earlier. Now, moving into the analysis. To this day, Marsha Kelly maintains her innocence, and she does have supporters who argue there is no direct evidence conclusively tying her to the murder of James Kelly. Prosecutors, however, painted a very different picture. They believed Marsha had spent years trying to find someone willing to kill her husband and finally succeeded. So the question becomes, was Marsha Kelly truly guilty? Let's examine the evidence. Starting with the factors suggesting guilt, Marsha and James reportedly had a volatile relationship, particularly when it came to parenting Shaina. James believed in discipline and punishment, while Marsha largely resisted enforcing consequences. There was also a $100,000 life insurance policy on James, which Marsha stood to collect after his death. Perhaps most damaging of all, Marsha allegedly asked multiple men to kill her husband on separate occasions. 2 men testified that she offered them money, trucks, and even jet skis in exchange for murdering James. Colton also claimed Marsha promised him money and a truck if he carried out the killing. Phone records added further suspicion. Marsha and Shaina communicated both shortly before and shortly after the murder. James's cell phone, found beside his bed, had been used to call Marsha at 3:56 a.m. Investigators doubted James himself made the call, believing he should have already been asleep by that point. Prosecutors theorized that Shaina may have used the phone so Marsha could hear the gunshot in real time. On the other hand, there were also factors working in Marsha's favor. She had a solid alibi and clearly did not physically participate in the murder itself. Although she admitted joking about wanting James dead, she insisted those comments were never serious. Additionally, Shaina had her own independent motive. She deeply resented James and likely viewed him as an obstacle to her freedom. During Marsha's trial, Shaina even testified that her mother had absolutely nothing to do with the crime. According to Shaina, there was no elaborate murder plot. The killing happened spontaneously. So, what do I personally think? I don't believe the prosecution had an overwhelmingly strong case. However, I do believe there was just enough evidence to establish guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The most persuasive detail, in my opinion, was the testimony from multiple men who claimed Marsha had independently attempted to hire them to kill James long before the murder actually happened. That pattern strongly suggests homicidal intent. As for what may have happened, this is only my theory. The devastating loss of her daughter and mother in the house fire profoundly affected Marsha. She likely understood how emotionally damaged Shaina had become and feared pushing her away. As a result, Marsha adopted an extremely permissive parenting style with almost no supervision or boundaries. Shaina was allowed to drive without a license at age 15, regularly skipped school, smoked, drank alcohol, and maintained a relationship with a convicted offender significantly older than her. Instead of correcting Shaina's behavior, Marsha appeared more focused on removing James from their lives entirely. Ironically, murder may have been the one thing Marsha and Shaina could fully agree on. Their relationship was chaotic and toxic, but they shared a common goal: getting rid of James Kelly permanently. Marsha may have wanted financial gain through life insurance money, while Shaina wanted freedom from household rules and discipline. After failing to recruit other men, Marsha allegedly found someone willing to act: Colton Weir. Colton was described as socially immature, highly gullible, and intellectually below average. He also appeared attracted to Shaina, which may have made him especially vulnerable to manipulation. One surprising moment during the trial occurred when Shaina defended her mother on the witness stand. Prosecutors were caught off guard, but perhaps they shouldn't have been. Toxic mother-daughter relationships often involve intense loyalty despite constant conflict. Marsha and Shaina appeared emotionally bonded through shared dysfunction. Could James Kelly have predicted his own murder? Probably not. James may have understood that neither Marsha nor Shaina truly liked him, but he likely failed to recognize how willing they were to cooperate toward a deadly objective. Even if he suspected conflict within the family, murder is such an extreme act that most people would never seriously believe they were in real danger. In many ways, this case demonstrates how chaotic family environments can escalate into unimaginable violence. What initially seemed like ordinary dysfunction and poor parenting eventually spiraled into homicide. Those are my thoughts on the case of Marsha Kelly. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.